Hello, and welcome to the new installment in my analysis series. Agatha All Along is one of the newest additions to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and is an example that I like to point to when I say that Marvel is at their best when they're telling character-driven stories. So let's talk about it in depth. In this video, I want to look at the characters, themes, and story of Agatha All Along, pull them apart and understand what makes this series so compelling and heartbreaking. And oh boy, do we have a tapestry of themes to look at. We have family dynamics, rigid expectations, dark desires, emotional and physical abuse, facing, falling into, and conquering destiny, and of course, generational trauma. And with both main characters being in queer relationships means this show is gay and campy as hell. It's just so much fun. I'm going to begin this analysis like I always do, with the series production. But then I will split this analysis up into episode by episode sections, so we can get the full story as it unfolds and discuss the themes and character development as they happen on screen. At the end, I will sum up my analysis and add any additional thoughts and questions I might have about the series overall. For the sake of brevity, I will be analyzing the plot strictly from the perspective of the cinematic universe, without assuming any prior knowledge of the comics. I try to write this script in a way that addresses every type of fan, super casual, invested only in the cinematic universe, and comic book readers. But this caused a lot of unnecessary backpedaling and overcomplicated explanations. This is going to be a brutally long video, and I can already feel the tears welling in my eyes at all the emotions. I just know I'm going to be crying while writing the script, which I did, and speaking it out loud. I'm going to be such a wreck. So please like and subscribe if you find this video entertaining and enlightening, or enlightening. I guess it doesn't matter which one you find it. Either way, I would greatly appreciate it. And now, the obligatory spoiler warning. This video will have major spoilers for Agatha All Along, WandaVision, and Doctor Strange, Multiverse of Madness. All of these shows and movies are relatively new, and my script basically starts with a major spoiler for WandaVision. Please be advised. Anyways, I'm very excited to talk to you guys all about this wonderful series, so let's dive into the production. Agatha All Along officially began production in late 2021, with Kathryn Hahn being contracted to reprise her role as Agatha Harkness from the Marvel miniseries WandaVision that released earlier that year. The lead writer of WandaVision, Jack Schaefer, was also contracted to write the series as well. A host of celebrities had been added to the cast in the following years, with Joe Locke as Billy Romanoff, or Teen as he's called throughout the series, Aubrey Plaza as Rio, or Death herself, Sashir Zamata as Jennifer Kale, Alison Ahn as Alice Wu Gulliver, Patti LuPone as Lilia Calderu, and Deborah Jo Rupp as Sharon Davis. We also see a lot of cast members reprising their roles as citizens of Westview from WandaVision. A fun bit of trivia you might know if you were following the production of the series, but the show went through at least 4 different name changes before landing on Agatha All Along, which comes from the theme song in WandaVision when it's revealed that Agnes was pulling the strings behind the scene as Agatha Harkness. Well, all along. The scrap names include Agatha House of Harkness, Agatha Coven of Chaos, Agatha The Darkhold Diaries, and according to Germain Lucier, the worst one, Agatha the Lying Witch in the Great Wardrobe. I personally like Agatha All Along the most, and choosing to name the series after the theme song fits with the musical aspects of this series, and it ties in with the title of each episode, which are all taken from the Ballad of the Witch's Road. I'm not gonna lie, I have driven most of my family and friends crazy with how often I sing the ballad. Every version of it. There's no shame in me. The songwriters from WandaVision, Christopher Beck, Kristen Anderson Lopez, and Robert Lopez composed and wrote the songs for Agatha All Along. Other writers of the show include Laura Donnie, Cameron Squires, Giovanna Sarkis, Laura Monti, Jason Rostovsky, Gia King, and Peter Cameron, with Squires, Cameron, Monty, and Donnie coming back from WandaVision to help Schaefer in creating this new story. I know this is a lot of names, and I promise you don't have to remember them. There is no test at the end of this video. Unless if you're in school and you're watching this video right before you actually have a test, but then that's not my fault. Anyways, I want to give credit to everyone who worked on this project because it is quite wonderful. The filming of the series began in January 2023 and officially wrapped by May of the same year. A few reshoots were scheduled and concluded in February of 2024, and the series would begin airing on Disney Plus on September 18th, 2024, with the final episode coming out the day before Halloween. It was a brilliant move to start airing the series during the spooky season, as it is a darker, scarier series than what Marvel typically does, and it's a time when fellow witches are looking for something magical to bite into. I have been spoiled by the new age, release every episode at once, binge watching culture. So I waited until the final episode came out and watched it on Halloween while dressed up in costume. It was a very fun Halloween. Now that I've celebrated the brilliant minds behind the series and regurgitated Wikipedia for you all, it's time to sink our teeth into the magic, the horror, and the heartbreak. Episode 1, Seekest Thou the Road. We open up the series seeing Agatha in normal clothes, humming what we would come to know as the Ballad of the Witch's Road, and she's driving a car. What we know from WandaVision is that Agatha was cursed by Wanda Maximoff, the Scarlet Witch, to live as a normal person with no power and no memory of her life. She did this in order to punish Agatha for manipulating her, but also to keep her alive, out of trouble, and in one place so Wanda could call on her if she needed. In the next sequence of events, we are led to believe that Agatha, now Agnes again, has been living her mundane life as a loose cannon detective, and she is pulling up to the scene of the murdered Jane Doe. Agatha is a fun character because she's similar to Deadpool in that she constantly makes meta commentary. Though she doesn't quite directly break the fourth wall to talk to the audience like Deadpool, she is a character that often knows more than she ever should. This makes her someone the writers use to indirectly tease fans. I say all of this because the Jane Doe is heavily implied to be Wanda Maximoff. Her fate has been one of the biggest unanswered questions since Multiverse of Madness, where she was last seen supposedly being crushed beneath a collapsing temple. Agatha and Wanda are deeply connected characters, both magically and thematically, and if anyone would know the fate of Wanda, it would be Agatha. The writers know this, and whenever someone directly asks or says Wanda is dead, Agatha will give a non answer with a wink. The teasing is spread further as we never see Wanda's face. The ambiguity is keeping to the comic book fan rhetoric of no body, not actually dead, and thus leaving her fate still up in the air. I enjoy the subversion of this opening scene, and it makes for an epic hook for the series. The advertisement for the series has been strictly about the magical aspects of Marvel, promising a dark adventure through witchy places unknown. But everything about this first episode says we are getting an eerie crime thriller based strictly in the familiar town of Westview. Which, don't get me wrong, I would eat up a magical crime thriller any day, so I was deeply into this. Even the openings are misleading, showing classic crime drama scenes of caution tape and coffee mugs, while listing the actors by their character names and giving a fake production company, hinting at this being a product of WandaVision. And the title card, Agnes of Westview, at the end seals the deal. This is the first of many clever misdirections, and the little details in this show are staggering when you sit down and start to tally them up. This is a full callback to the sitcom alternate reality Wanda makes in WandaVision, showing the nature of the curse on Agatha to be similar to what Wanda did to Westview. And I particularly love the caution tape. It's a path that's followed by the camera throughout the opening credits, the bright yellow reminiscent of the yellow brick road, another road that's been haunted by the Wicked Witch, hinting at the real journey that this series will take. It's just so good. Agnes begins investigating, and while it's perfectly balanced by Catherine Hahn's comedically timed quips, everything seems a bit off and creepy. It feels like everyone is having a different conversation than Agnes, some lines coming out in a way that doesn't line up with what we are currently seeing. This becomes especially apparent when Aubrey Plaza's character, currently going by FBI agent Vidal, shows up. At first, it feels like Vidal is insinuating a sexual undertone to their conversation, but that quickly goes away as Vidal keeps asking questions that seem to disorient Agnes. This all is to further serve the hook this episode is providing. As the mysteries keep piling up, so do viewer interests. And things spiral further as we are introduced to Teen. We know him as Billy Maximoff later in the series, but his identity and his power are hidden with magic. Teen breaks into Agnes's house. She catches him, and while her interrogation with him begins normal, things slowly begin to unravel with every question she asks. The photos of the body turn into photos of flowers. The observation window turns into a painting we saw on Agnes's wall earlier, and we begin to understand Agnes isn't seeing reality for what it is. She has to actively remind herself of the details of the Jane Doe case, as if those memories and the reality of them are slipping away. And then we get the moment. The disorientation spikes. Agnes becomes feverish and she begins to strip off layer after layer of different decades of clothing, each one an outfit she wore in WandaVision. With each discarded piece, she sheds Wanda's curse, reclaiming the self she had forgotten. Agent Vidal is there, talking her through the metamorphosis, and she finally says to her, "There are two Jane Does in this room. You know her name," pointing at the covered body of Wanda. "Now what's yours?" And Agnes peels off the last layer, finding herself naked and reborn as Agatha once again. Vidal connecting Agatha and Wanda is just so good. It exemplifies how deeply intertwined their stories are and foreshadows the themes of grief, loss, and reclaiming your autonomy and your power. With Agatha's curse lifted, she still finds herself powerless, which isn't great for her because she realized that Teen wasn't a hallucination caused by the curse like Wanda's body was. And as she realizes he's real, she realizes that Vidal was probably real as well. And Vidal, as the audience might have guessed by now, has history with Agatha. And it's apparently not a good history, as Vidal blasts open Agatha's front door and starts throwing down. Agatha, bleeding and on the verge of losing to Vidal, negotiates a fragile truce between them. The terms: Vidal waits until Agatha gets her powers back before she can come for her. But Agatha needs to survive long enough to get her powers back. The episode ends with Agatha contemplating what to do with the still tied up teen. This is probably the most plot driven episode in the series, the mystery and the action taking center stage as the show builds up its premise for the audience, and introduces us to the three main external forces in the show: Agatha, Teen, and Vidal. And they are just as much forces as they are characters, but more on that later. This episode does a lot in its 35-minute runtime to set the stage and tear it down again, leading the audience from one mystery to another as we go from crime thriller to dark fantasy in a single leap. It's a compelling hook that will have casual and hardcore fans foaming at the mouth to find out what happens next. The main reason for this intrigue is the shroud of mystery that hangs around the three characters. We kind of know who Agatha is from WandaVision. She's a cunning, ancient, and murderous witch. And with this knowledge, most viewers will be left wondering, so why is she our main lens in which we see this world? Villains aren't main characters. And who are Vidal and Teen? We can surmise that Vidal is connected to Agatha's past, and that they did not part on good terms. But why did it seem like Vidal was coaching Agatha out of her curse, and therefore helping her? And what does Teen have to do with any of this, and why is he in Westview? And while the episode is a great hook into the series with the amount of questions you need to have answered by the end of it, it only leaves room enough to quietly lay the groundwork for one of the show's devastating themes: grief, particularly through the lens of lost motherhood. Agatha's story, much like Wanda's before her, is one of power intertwined with loss. This series explores femininity in its many struggles in different ways, but one of its core focuses is about the lengths a mother will go to for her child's safety. We can understand that Agatha has lost her child when, as Agnes, she goes into a room that's decorated for a small boy. Agatha looks broken and lost as she stares at the room, and then the scene moves on, and unfortunately, we really won't find out the meaning of this room and its connection to this theme until the very end of the series. So, with many questions in our mind and only a taste of the deeper, heartbreaking themes to come, we move on to episode 2: Circle Sun with Fate, Unlock Thy Hidden Gate. We begin right where we left off. Teen still tied up and Agatha running around, frazzled by the fight with Vidal, and we get two name drops: the Witch's Road, a place of legend that grants all who survive it their heart's desire, and Agatha calls the boy Teen for the first time. Teen asks Agatha to take him to the Witch's Road, and she declines, until she discovers two things about him. He was the one to break the curse on Agatha, and he has a spell placed on him so she cannot hear his name. Intrigued, Agatha makes Teen drive her to three witches. The first is the divination witch, Lilia. But before we talk about her, let's talk a bit more about Agatha, because this is her show after all. The best part about the curse being lifted from Agatha is that her full, glorious, vain, and devious personality is back. One thing I noticed in my rewatch is that as Agnes, Catherine Hahn never does the big open mouth smile that has become so associated with Agatha's mischief. And thinking about it, Agnes was so angry compared to Agatha. She was mean, not snarky, cold, but not wickedly cunning, brazen, but not for the sake of the drama. This proves that Wanda's curse wasn't just about sealing away Agatha's magic, it was about erasing her identity. The spell didn't just suppress power, it suppressed personality. Agatha's natural vivacity, her mischievous cunning, her flair for the dramatic, smothered. What remained was a hollow version of herself, stripped of her own agency. This adds another layer to her journey, not just reclaiming her magic, but reclaiming who she is. It's a small detail, but one that works so brilliantly well to emphasize the theme of reclaiming one's power. Lilia furthers this understanding by plainly spelling out the unspoken nature of Wanda's curse. She stole Agatha's agency as a person. We've been given hints that the heart of Agatha's character is power intertwined with loss, but Lilia's words ground our understanding that Agatha's driving force in the narrative is her journey to reclaim her lost agency. And this is why I love Lilia's character. She's an expertly crafted entity that serves so many roles within the narrative, while pushing the limits of the series' theme of subversion. As the group's diviner, she falls into a role often boxed into two tired tropes: the kooky mystic who can't distinguish future from present, and the sage advisor who speaks in cryptic riddles. And Lilia challenges the way witches, particularly diviners, are stereotyped in stories. She embodies both the kooky erratic seer and the wise cryptic sage tropes, yet she actively subverts them. Her blunt, unfiltered speech prevents her from being truly enigmatic, while her deep knowledge and precision contrasts the idea of diviners as absent-minded mystics. By existing in both roles and refusing to be fully defined by either, Lilia forces us to question how we expect diviners, especially female ones, to behave in fantasy stories. And this challenge isn't just buried in subtext. Lilia actively calls out the stereotypes placed on witches throughout the series, adding yet another layer of subversion to the story. Most narratives let subtext do the heavy lifting when it comes to challenging tropes. Characters exist as subversive figures, but they rarely get to call out those stereotypes directly. Lilia, however, actively confronts the labels placed on witches, adding yet another layer of meta subversion to the story. The writers aren't just challenging tropes through her, they're challenging how we tell these stories in the first place. After leaving Lilia to think on Agatha's proposal, the two go to meet the next witch on their list, Jennifer Kale. We learn a little bit about her character. She's a potions witch, and like Agatha, her powers have been sealed away by someone else. This connection leads us to understand that Jennifer's story is going to also circle around the theme of regaining one's autonomy. But with Jen being a black woman, the meaning behind this journey is different than Agatha's, as there are deeper ties to real life systemic issues that give Jen's journey gravitas. Though we don't see the extent of these themes and nuance Marvel brings to them until later episodes. So until then, I want to talk about Teen really fast, as he talks a lot more to Jen than he did Lilia, and I think it's important. With Teen mirroring Agatha's behavior after their encounter with Lilia, which they started with a charade of them being mother and son, which I think is really ironic and cool. This foreshadows the relationship the two form over the course of the series and highlights the themes of motherhood that circles around them. There's also the subtle undertone we are getting here, and it's the theme of survival and desperation. This theme is less overarching than it is about current motivations for most of these characters, except for the third witch on Agatha's list, Alice Wu Gulliver, whose motivations are completely steeped in survival and desperation. While Agatha and Teen stalk Alice in a mall, they discuss how Alice is deeply connected to the Witch's Road. Her mother wrote the most popular version of the ballad, and her mother supposedly died on the road as well. We will soon find out that Alice is desperate to find out what happened to her mom and to feel connected to her once again. This will connect Agatha and Alice together through the theme of power and loss. Alice may not get much screen time in this episode, but she proves she understands the Witch's Road better than anyone, and in a blink and you'll miss it moment, she subtly foreshadows one of the biggest plot twists of the series. We won't realize the significance of what she says until much later, but on rewatch, it's clear that Alice's intuition was correct. Back at Agatha's house, Jen, Lilia, and Alice all show up, but Jen points out that they are missing a fifth witch, the Green Witch. Agatha pointedly tries to avoid the last name on Lilia's list, but Lilia remembers she didn't write a name, just a black heart. So this foreshadowing was probably more subtle for a weekly release series, but when you're binge watching it, it's a pretty obvious reveal that whoever Vidal was, she was the last witch that was to join them on the road. As she says herself, she has a black heart. But Agatha deflects this reveal by going to grab Mrs. Hart, or rather, Mrs. Davis. It's a clever enough misdirection that at least works on the other witches. With the coven mostly assembled, we now arrive at what is, without question, the emotional heart of the episode, the Ballad of the Witch's Road. This is the song that's been haunting the series so far, always in the background. It's an evocation, a plea, a test of will. It's the moment of truth for each witch, laying bare their desires, their fears, and their desperation. And their performances? Absolutely perfection. Now, the actors have to do a lot of heavy lifting in this scene to make sure that the emotions of each character are properly conveyed, and they nailed it. The road is notoriously difficult to conjure, and everyone is afraid that it won't work even though they don't say as much, but we can tell their true fears by the way they sing the ballad. Alice is crying through the song. She is begging the road to appear so she can get the closure she is desperate for. Lilia is praying. Her head is bowed and then raised to the sky as she implores her guides to bring her to her destiny. And Jen is singing in defiance. She knows that if she succeeds, she will be spitting in the eye of everyone and everything that's been holding her down. And then there's Agatha. Catherine Hahn knows this character so well. She perfectly portrays all of Agatha's thoughts on her face. The open-mouthed smile at the beginning, hinting at Agatha being mischievous, the smile slowly disappearing as the song continues, the rage that eventually consumes her features as she grows impatient and angry as she is forced to remember something we don't know about yet. And that's the best part about rewatching the show and writing this analysis. I can see how clearly the writers were hinting at the truth of the road, and how brilliantly it connects to the last time we hear the ballad sung like this. It's just so fucking good. I can't wait to mention it again later. So for now, let's talk about what happens next. The door doesn't appear. The witches start pointing fingers, and Teen is attacked, which is the perfect segue to discuss my least favorite part of the series, the Salem Seven. The Seven act as an external timer of sorts for the characters, always right behind them, pushing the group forward when they linger for too long. They exist solely to keep the show tethered to the traditional superhero format, which is exactly why I don't like them. This shows that Marvel doesn't trust their audience to be invested in the emotional tension and personal motivations of the characters. They use this physical threat as a backup means of tension instead of allowing the emotions to be the sole factor leading the story forward, and it's disappointing, especially because the emotional jumping off point of the whole series, the ballad, is broken up by these loud cut-tos of Teen witnessing the Seven slowly approach. Even the placement of the Seven's reveal is directly used to dilute the scene, so it's more palpable to Marvel fans who might be turned off by this expertly crafted emotional explosion of an I Want song. Luckily, they released the version of the song without the cut tos for those of us who just want to experience the moment. Anyways, sermon over. Sorry. Agatha singing the ballad didn't work. Tries plan B. Rile up the witches and get them to hit her with her power so she can steal it, as mentioned by Agatha earlier in the episode. But Lilia calls her out on it, and just when Agatha snaps, a door appears on the floor, going down, down, down to the witch's road. And on we move to episode 3, through many miles of tricks and trials. We begin the episode by following the stairs down to the road, after the exit had disappeared behind the witches, supposedly keeping the Seven away. Almost everyone is shocked that the road exists. With so many witches never finding it or dying if they do, most of the witches in the group believed it to be a myth. But with the realization that it does exist, they begin to look towards the wording in the ballad to understand the nature of the road. Be still your fears, tricks and trials. I stray not from the path. If the sun be gone, they must not step off the road. It is an eternal night, and they will be facing trials with challenges centered around their greatest fears. I like that Teen is the expository outlet for the audience, explaining some of the witchier elements. With him being the youngest by decades, it feels natural that he would be showing off his knowledge of the different aspects of witchcraft, and this allows the witches to begin to question who he is and why he's there. And when he tries to say his name, they recognize that someone placed a sigil on him so the witches can't know who he is. This all makes the exposition in the narrative feel natural and cleverly woven into the story itself, instead of it being random asides or not saying anything at all and hoping the audience will just be able to piece it together. We also get a moment right at the beginning that shows us how well Agatha understands the other women in the coven. She begins to list the specific things that they all came looking for, even though they never said it out loud, and promises them the road will provide it as long as they don't lose faith and continue down the road. But as she's listing them, we notice Sharon Davis has run away, and thanks to her catching her breath on a patch of moth that tries to eat her, we get the rule not to step off the designated path. With Sharon found and safe, they make their way to their first trial, found at a beautiful seaside manor bound in endless sunset. For some people, you might notice a sudden drop in the quality of CGI surrounding the house. And while it might come off as lazy or immersion breaking, there is a reason for this that I will talk about later. I hope I can remember to talk about all the things I keep saying I'm going to talk about. There's a chance I'll forget something, but it wouldn't be the first. Anyways, now I can talk about how its dreamlike and slightly off-kilter ambience serves as a metaphor for the deceptive tranquility that masks underlying dangers, hinting at the trial to come. This environment also reflects the internal states of the characters, beautiful facades concealing painful pasts and fears. The group enters the house and quickly find that they are sealed inside and their outfits have changed to match the scenery. They eventually find a card, the first in a series of what Agatha calls very obvious breadcrumbs, that leads them to their first trial, wine. Poisoned wine. This is the water trial, the potion witch's specialty. Agatha tries to avoid drinking the wine, probably suspecting it will kill her, but when her cheating is brought to light, Teen tries to drink it instead. She stops him in a very meaningful way and then drinks up herself. Jen recognizes the poison based on the symptoms she sees in Mrs. Hart, who drank the poison first and knows how to make the antidote. One of the symptoms Jen lists is hallucinations. And of course, that's the symptom they face when they split up to look for the ingredients Jen needs. Using hallucinations as a way to explore a character's inner psyche and make them face horrific versions of their inner turmoil is cliche at this point, but it is a very effective trope when done well, like how we see in the show. With this being Jen's trial, we would think that this would be a Jen-centric episode, but there's a strict balance between the three hallucinations as we see them. This gives us a chance to get to know the three witches and what exactly brought them to where they were when Agatha and Teen found them. Alice is haunted by a vision of her mother shortly after her grandmother died, and the information that we get from this vision insinuates that Alice's mother likely spiraled after this point. Her mother flicking a lighter is also fantastic imagery and foreshadowing that they added to the scene. Lilia is confronted with the image of a young girl wearing a medieval dress, speaking Sicilian, and the girl leads her down an altered hallway. Lilia eventually finds the decaying body of an older woman and a veiled skeleton standing behind her. We can't glean much from this vision besides Lilia being from Italy, but it will all be explained later. Jen's vision is the darkest in nature. She is confronted by a white man who insults her, grabs her, and tries to drown her. The context is enough to understand that this is someone in Jen's past that's assaulted her. Luckily, the vision releases her before she can succumb to the water. But the risk of drowning isn't quite over yet. As the group converges, they realize the house is now completely underwater. The windows that Agatha tried to smash earlier are the only things keeping the sea at bay. They get to work making the potion, and then Agatha is confronted with her hallucination, a baby crying in a basket. But when she goes to pull back the blanket, shaking with fear of seeing her son again, it's the Darkhold. Jen had told Teen earlier this episode that Agatha sold her son for the Book of the Damned, and this vision seems to solidify that story. This moment is one of the few times we see Agatha genuinely vulnerable. She plays a long game, always staying a step ahead, but here, the hallucination forces her to confront something she refuses to admit to herself: regret. Whether she actually sold her son or whether there's more to the story remains unclear, but this vision suggests that, at her core, Agatha fears she made the wrong choice. Seeing the Darkhold in place of her child is a gut punch, symbolizing what she may have lost in her pursuit of power. The writing here is so smart because it doesn't confirm her guilt, but it shows that on some level, she believes she's guilty. The hallucination doesn't just reveal something about Agatha, it also strengthens the mystery around Teen. I know I've spoiled who Teen is at this point, but think about this from the perspective of someone who doesn't know the truth. If the vision of the Darkhold proves that part of Jen's story is true, what else is? Is Teen really Agatha's son? A plant from Mephisto? Someone else? Fan theories ran wild, especially since Marvel never outright confirmed Teen was Billy Maximoff before the reveal. For those unfamiliar with the comics, Billy's significance in the larger Marvel universe wasn't immediately obvious, so the ambiguity of his identity kept viewers speculating. The Salem 7 remain one of the most frustrating parts of the series. This episode proves that they are completely unnecessary. The stakes already exist: the rising sea, the poison's timer, the risk of failure at each trial. If the show wanted tension, it had it. But instead, the 7 are shoehorned in as an extra looming threat, one that takes away from the personal emotional stakes already present in the trials. They just feel like an afterthought, like Marvel was worried the audience wouldn't stay engaged without a more traditional external enemy. But this episode shows that they never needed that safety net. After Jen gets a hold of herself thanks to Agatha's pep talk that begins with her saying, "I have always hated you," Jen finishes the antidote at the last second, and they almost forget to give it to the unconscious Mrs. Hart. The oven doors open in the kitchen. Lilia makes a comment about her friend being burned alive in one. I think it was a joke about Hansel and Gretel's witch. They bicker for about 2 seconds about going into the oven when the windows finally break and the house begins to flood. They escape, mostly unscathed, except for Mrs. Hart, Sharon Davis, the woman who spent most of WandaVision trying to return to normal, only to be dragged back into something beyond her control. Her death isn't just shocking, it's tragic. Sharon wasn't a witch, wasn't seeking power, wasn't even supposed to be here, and yet she was the first casualty of the Witch's Road. Before we move on to episode 4, I want to talk about how this episode is a bit on the plot heavy side. This is because this episode sets up the formula for the following episodes by showing us the story beats that are mirrored throughout the rest of the series. The group walks the road, bonding, explaining their personal lore, and picking apart Agatha's secrets and lies, and the secrets of the road as well. This will be followed by that episode's trial, which will center around the talents of someone in the group. They will succeed or fail depending on whether they can work together, and then move on to the next trial. And with the death of Mrs. Davis, we all now understand the consequences of them not solving their challenges in time. So, with all that said, let's move into If I Can't Reach You, Let My Song Teach You. The episode begins with a somber scene as Teen digs a shallow grave for Mrs. Davis. Agatha makes an offhanded comment, and Alice confesses she isn't on the road to find out what happened to her mom. Lorna Wu died in a hotel fire, thus the flicking lighter in Alice's hallucination. Alice is on the road because her mother said the road can protect her. Mysterious. Jen points out, again, that they are lacking a green witch. Agatha tries to assure them that a full coven is only needed to get onto the road, not finish the road. But they aren't buying it, so they summon another witch to them. As part of the spell, they made a human-shaped space in the leaves of the ground, a landing zone for the summoned witch. But when Vidal pops out of the ground, it's where Teen had just buried Mrs. Davis. This is very telling to the nature of Vidal, but we will talk about that later. And she reintroduces herself as Rio. The first few minutes of this episode has a lot of fun bickering among the coven. They remind me of a group of sisters, pointing fingers, reading each other to filth. I especially love the moment when they summon Rio and they think Mrs. Davis is coming back as a zombie. Jen yells, "Agatha, what did you do?" And she replies, "Me? This was clearly a group effort." While Alice and Lilia search Teen's spellbook for an offensive spell, while Lilia is cursing at Teen's tiny handwriting. This moment, paired with the fantastically unhinged acting of Aubrey Plaza, makes the opening moment so funny. And there are two purposes for this. The main purpose is to balance out the emotions of this episode. As it starts with the burial of Mrs. Davis, and when they enter the trial is when this episode becomes about exploring grief, regret, and loss. The second reason for the lively interaction is to highlight how Sharon's death acted as a moment of bonding between the coven, solidifying their uneasy truth for the sake of power into a pact of camaraderie for the sake of survival. That makes Sharon's death more than a tragic consequence, but an important stepping stone in the witch's journey. Seeing the house, Alice immediately turns around and tries to suggest they go around this trial. But even as they walk away, the road places the house right in front of them again. This is a fantastic metaphor for confronting your trauma. Like the house is in this moment, you can't run away or avoid it. It will always be an obstacle in your path until you take a peek inside and do the work to heal. And this is a building built to honor the pain of the past. Though its funky 60s theme would make you think otherwise. Lilia is immediately confronted with tapestries depicting the European witch trials, one of the many tragedies she predicted but could do nothing about. Jen is wigged out by a demon mask, an event we are not too sure about even at the end of the series, but maybe we'll find out later in the cinematic Marvel universe. Agatha has Rio to contend with, and Alice finds a portrait of her mother. And again, I am amazed at the balance the writers are performing in this moment. The themes of this episode are going to be some of the heaviest we've seen, but the humor, the amazing outfits, it keeps just enough levity in the moment to keep the audience relaxed without taking away from the building drama. Agatha tries to turn the witches against Rio by showing them her penchant for collecting dead witches, but before anything could come of it, Teen finds a clue, a record, and playing it begins the second trial. This is the trial of fire, Alice's trial. They call her a blood witch, but it's just a weird term for a witch who is proficient in protection magic, the bodyguard of the coven. It's fitting, as Alice spends the first few minutes of the trial casting protection circles around her coven as the generational curse that was on Alice has taken form and is attacking everyone. Before I start emotionally breaking down why I break down the symbolism of this episode, let's talk about Alice's curse, as it's only been hinted at so far. Alice's family has been cursed so that every woman in their family will have bad luck and die a painful, burning death. The curse going from one generation to the next, only passing along when the older family member passes on. Alice, despite being a witch and knowing some witchcraft, never believes the curse is real. She believes it's her fault she can't hold a job and that her mother died, which makes everything I'm about to discuss even more heartbreaking. The fucking symbolism in this scene just goes so hard. First, Teen starts listing homeopathic and fairy tale ways of ridding the curse, which is so fitting because one of the first things people do when beginning their journey of healing is dipping their toes into woo-woo spiritualism. But when wise sage Lilia says, very plainly, the only way to break a curse is to face it, which is not even a veiled way of saying, you have to face your traumas, love. The curse being invisible yet harming everyone around Alice is a perfect metaphor for unprocessed trauma. How the pain we refuse to acknowledge doesn't just hurt us, but also the people who love us. It's a cycle passed down like a haunting until someone is strong enough to break it. And when Alice breaks down, saying, I didn't believe it was real. I thought it was all my fault. I just about died. So let's break it down further. Alice's curse, as I've been slowly building up to, is a metaphor for generational trauma. If this were the real world, as an Asian woman, Alice would have grown up in a family that stigmatized and or didn't believe in mental health disorders. Despite seeing her mother go through, let's face it, the cold thousand-mile stare in her mother's eyes in the previous episode definitely signified a deep depression. Alice can't recognize the same problems within herself. She doesn't believe she has the same illness as her mother because, for cultural reasons, she doesn't believe the illness is real. She sees all of her failures and shortcomings as a product of her not being good enough, not because she was operating without a full deck of cards, which only exacerbated the underlying condition. This is also an analogy for the impossibly high expectations placed on Asian American children by their parents, and hints at how this real world issue has led to Asian American teens being the highest demographic to unalive themselves by a significant margin. And then when the trial begins and Alice feels lighter, this symbolizes a few things. The first being the lightness people feel when they first start taking major steps in healing their past. The next is how, when people help you heal, they help take on the burden of your pain. This is further demonstrated with the other coven members being attacked by the curse, gaining the same scar that Alice has been carrying. These emotional revelations lead us to the second performance of the Ballad of the Witch's Road, Lorna Wu's version. Agatha realizes the nature of this version of the song. It's not to conjure the road, it's to protect Alice from the curse. You should have burnt up years ago, she said to Alice, but because at any given time, someone somewhere in this world was playing your dead mother's song, protecting you. This might be the most powerful moment in the whole series, feeling the need and the love in the words a mother wrote in a desperate attempt to save her daughter from the fate she knew was coming. Alice didn't just hate the song, she feared it, feared what it meant, feared the pain it carried, and yet, in the end, it became her salvation. A song written by a mother who knew she would not survive, sung by her daughter as the final tool in ending the generations of pain. It's so lovely. It perfectly encapsulates the fact that it takes more than just a single member in a family to break generational trauma. It takes multiple generations doing the work together. In this moment of song and love and defiance and hope is that work. I can't reach you. Let my song teach you. I'm crying harder than I did when I first watched this episode. God, it's just so beautiful. Alice kills the curse with an angry belting of her mother's promise to her. I will see you at the end. The emotions don't slow down as Teen passes out due to a shard of glass in his stomach, which honestly got the smallest emotional reaction out of me from this entire episode. But this leads us to a powerful moment with Jen, when she enchants a bowl of water into a healing solution for Teen's wounds. Lilia points it out to her. Jen, look what you did. Meaning, Jen, look, even bound by the people who hurt you, you have power. Lilia has another powerful moment with Alice as the witches sit around a fire waiting for Teen to wake up. They are talking about their lives. Jen tells us how she was bound, that she doesn't know how he did it, but it was a trap set by the man in her hallucinations. Then Alice confesses she stopped believing in magic when her mother died, as she hoped the road didn't exist so she could stay angry forever. Lilia says, now that you know it was all for you, it makes you sad. But sad is better than angry, which speaks very deeply to me, personally, and I think it speaks to a common truth of the human experience. Anger feels like power compared to sadness. Anger is a shield around our hearts that keeps all of the sadness out, but also keeps out the joy and the love. So it's not worth keeping the shield up forever. You have to let in the sadness to let go of the anger. Gosh, this feels like an eternal episode. So we move on from the ladies around the campfire with Lilia listing crazy stereotypes about witches she's heard over the ages, and we move to Teen waking up with Agatha watching over him. They have a very tender moment, further cementing their familial bond, but then Teen asks about Agatha's son and she shuts down. Agatha is again reminded of her loss when Rio confirms that Teen is not Nicholas Scratch, and it becomes harder for Agatha to wear her mask of opulent disinterest. I also want to talk about one more thing. Alice's singing being interrupted by her sudden realization, I can see it, and I can kill it. It's a little on the nose for me, but honestly, it doesn't matter, because her singing it to death was so thematically good that any slack the interruption might have caused is immediately rectified. The emotional tightrope the writers made for themselves was impressively made and perfectly executed. Before moving on, I have to mention a personal anecdote about this episode. After finally pulling myself together, my friend, who had already seen the series, asked me what I thought would happen next. Being a writer and someone who picks up on patterns, I started listing off my predictions, one by one, episode by episode. And to my shock, I got 4 out of 5 major fates correct. The show is that well structured. Everything matters. Every clue is placed with care. And yet, despite picking up so many details, I still missed the biggest twist at the end. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's talk about episode 5, Darkest Hour, Wake Thy Power. So up until now, I haven't mentioned the small recap at the beginning of each episode, but this recap starts with the information we haven't seen since WandaVision, and it sets up the themes of what will be explored in this episode. So let's talk about it first, and not because I want to avoid mentioning what happens at the beginning of this episode. Nope, that's not the reason at all. So we get a flashback to the height of the Salem witch trials when Agatha was put to the stake by her own coven, and then they try to execute her. Agatha kills them all by stealing their magic and life force. Then we see flashes of what we've seen so far in the series, but not the big major events, rather all the small instances of Agatha and her son, and the people connected to them. While this episode is packed with major plot reveals and big action beats, it still doesn't lose sight of the character driven storytelling that makes the series so compelling. We finally get another look at Agatha's past, her defining tragedy, and the consequences of her addiction to power. Unlike some of the other plot heavy episodes, this one keeps this momentum by intertwining major reveals with strong emotional payoffs. Now, with that covered, I guess I have to say it. The episode begins with the Salem Seven making their way onto the road through the door left open by the summoning of Rio. I will say, their creepy movements and their dissonant whispers make for the beginning of a very terrifying story, which fits the theme of the next trial scenery. So they aren't completely pointless in this episode, but I still don't like them, because do you know what else they are here for? To make the group go to the next trial, which is what they would have done anyways! We do get this lovely moment where the group, in an effort to make a quick escape, make brooms to fly away on. The moment is snarky and silly and is layered with world building, with Lilia ranting about why witches find brooms tacky. Agatha announces that the act of flying is about selflessness. A coven flies together or not at all. This is coupled with the ritual to make a broom being a collaborative one, two witches circling each other and then exchanging the brooms they've made. This is to symbolize the growing bond of the coven. Even as they bicker, they are slowly becoming friends. The group is eventually chased into their next trial, a house decorated like an 80s horror camp hideaway, and of course, they are given outfits to match. This is Agatha's trial. They don't call it the spirit trial, but that's the gist of what it is. They have to use a Ouija board to commune with the dead to find out what they need to do to complete the trial, and things go south, but not until after Agatha fakes a possession that tricks Lilia until the end. It's a pretty funny gag. There's an interesting moment where Rio calls Agatha out that she's scared of who will answer the call. And when Agatha answers who she thinks it might be, I believe she's being candid when she says it could be anyone. But I wonder who she fears the most: Wanda, her son, or anyone else she might have murdered? After committing to the ritual of communing with the dead, Agatha is actually possessed by her mother. Agatha's possession is a really fun scene. They pay homage to a lot of possession and ghost movies with this, having Agatha's face look like the girl from The Exorcist and having her body contort and run around like the Grudge. The possession doesn't last long and her mother lets her go, then manifests to the rest of the group. She wants the group to leave Agatha with her in the Salem Seven. Rio vehemently disagrees, despite having been okay with the group slitting Agatha's throat, but that was before Rio knew it was Agatha's mom who was haunting them. Agatha asks her mom why she hates her so much, and she replies, "You were born evil. I should have killed you the moment you left my body." This visibly shakes Agatha, and we can see how the other members of the group feel for her. This is one of the themes that eventually comes up within most villain to anti-hero or hero to villain stories. Are we born evil? Agatha is no exception to this trope, but whereas most stories want us to leave with the hope that no, we are not born evil, Agatha doesn't do that. As we are watching her beg for help, promising she will be good, she gets possessed, and Alice hits her with her protection magic. It works. It banishes the ghost, but when Agatha takes control again, she grabs hold of Alice's magic and begins to drink her dry. This is devastating. We see Agatha be shamed by the claim she was born evil. We see someone who knows her deeply, Rio, recoil as if Agatha was stabbed when her mother said those words. We hear her promise she will be good. We believed in Agatha's redemption. We believed in her promises. And when given the next opportunity, not even a minute later, she chooses to kill the woman who stepped up to protect her. This is the writer's way to really make you question if everyone is truly redeemable, or are some people beyond redemption. Teen sees the Ouija board going crazy as Agatha kills Alice. He reads the name the planchette is spelling out, Nicholas Scratch, and everyone hears Agatha's son call out to her to stop. But it's too late. Alice is gone. But the door opens and Agatha runs away. Alice's death was one of my accurate predictions. She had her emotional resolution. She got what she needed from the Witch's Road. And there were 5 episodes left. I couldn't see a way she lived to the very end of the show. She couldn't grow anymore, and with her gone, that leaves more screen time for the other characters to grow as well. But it doesn't feel like a needless death. It's tragic, and adds to the theme of power and loss, especially for Teen. Teen goes after Agatha and confronts her. She tries to tell him she couldn't control it, which he doesn't believe. I think she's kind of telling the truth, or what she believes to be the truth. I think her ability is a metaphor for addiction, one that she can't get a handle on. On the one hand, that means her power is within her control, so she doesn't have to kill people. But on the other hand, she doesn't have the emotional and personal control to do so. Wanda's curse wasn't the first piece of magic to steal Agatha's agency. Her own power and her addiction to it has been taking her agency for centuries. And it's a tragic parallel to Wanda, another witch who's been feared for being too dangerous. But while Wanda lost herself in grief, Agatha loses herself in hunger and rage. Both women have fought against their own power, but always end up consumed by it. And just like Wanda, Agatha refuses to take responsibility, insisting it's out of her control, whether that's true or not. The reality is the same. People die because of her. Teen furthers his confrontation with Agatha by asking, "Is this what being a witch means? Killing others for your own end? No, not for me." And Agatha flips a switch inside of her. We are seeing her fail the lesson Alice learned earlier from Lilia. She is turning her sadness into anger. Instead of feeling the loss of her son, acknowledging the pain of losing her agency to her power again, and letting go of the hope of having a better past with her mom, she chooses to shield herself with anger. And Teen gave her a righteous flame to light up with. A trait Agatha didn't like about Wanda was her self-righteous and hypocritical attitude about morality, and Teen commits the same sin when he claims he would never kill to meet his own ends, which, you guessed it, I will explain later. Agatha laughs in his face and says he is just like his mother. This is the big reveal moment. Teen takes control of Jen and Lilia, who grab Agatha and throw her in the mud surrounding the road, then blast Jen and Lilia into the mud. It's a perfect, terrible moment. For so long, at least for those of us not in the know, the question has been, who is Teen? Is he Mephisto's agent, a reincarnation of Agatha's son? Something worse? But now we have our answer. He is Billy Maximoff. He is the son of the Scarlet Witch, and just like his mother before him, his first instinct when faced with pain and betrayal is to lash out, to hurt, and take control. Before we move on to the next episode, I want to talk about one more small thing. This moment with Teen putting everyone in the mud is a direct mirroring of Agatha killing Alice. Teen, like Agatha, has just claimed he would be a good witch, but then immediately it goes against this claim and hurts the people around him. It calls back to the mirroring Teen does when convincing Jen to join the coven, and further exemplifies how much influence Agatha has over Teen. And now we move on to episode 6, Familiar by Thy Side. This episode begins not on the road, but in a synagogue. The cinematography is deliberately hazy and dreamlike. The Hebrew hymns, shifting camera angles, the softened lighting all contribute to the feeling of a memory recalled through a fog, as if by someone who was only partially present. We are seeing Teen's bar mitzvah, 3 years before the present story, back when Wanda still had control over Westview. Teen's real name is William Kaplan, as we see on the little pamphlets at his bar mitzvah. Now you might be thinking, I thought you'd been telling us he's Billy Maximoff. Didn't you just say he was Billy Maximoff? Don't worry, I'll get to it, but first I want to explain why we are seeing these events. This episode serves as a deep dive into Teen's origins, grounding us in the life he led before magic disrupted it. The bar mitzvah isn't just a coming of age ritual, it's a symbol of stability, tradition, and belonging. It establishes that before everything changed, Teen had a normal, happy life. But the party comes to an abrupt end. The anomaly over Westview is pulsating, and we get an interesting perspective we never got in WandaVision. How was the rest of the world, especially the surrounding towns, handling the events of WandaVision? And apparently at Eastview, they had a whole system of emergency responders and even automated text alerts in case anything happened with the anomaly. On the way home, William and his parents get into a car accident, and I still gasped when I saw the collision with the tree. The directors made sure you felt the hit. It was fantastically brutal. The camera focuses on the parents first, as they come to and realize their son is bleeding and no longer breathing. And then it pans back, and we can hear a heartbeat as the sound of his mother's frantic attempts to wake him fade away. And the heartbeat slows, and then it stops. This is far from the epic, heroic deaths we see in the typical action-packed Marvel series. This is a tragedy played out in real time, a simple mistake that led to a dire consequence, the mundane sound of a car crunching against another object. But because this is Marvel and magic is real, a miracle happens. We hear the echoing voices of children saying, "Good night, Billy. Good night, Tommy." I can't distinguish between the voices of children I don't personally know, let alone remember what they sound like 3 years later, but I can use context clues to understand that these are the voices of Wanda's kids. And as their voices fade, the heartbeat is back and beating faster and stronger than it did before. William wakes up and calls out for Tommy, indicating, out of the two voices we heard, he's now Billy. All is not quite well, because Billy isn't William, so his parents and the doctors believe he has amnesia. And Billy can read minds, which is distressing for everyone when the person can't control the power. So we learned that somehow, 3 years ago, Billy Maximoff entered the dying body of William Kaplan. But we also learned that Teen, I prefer Teen over Billy, had come in contact with Lilia, Alice, and knew of Jen before the events of the story. Lilia was a fortune teller hired for his bar mitzvah. She was also the one to place the sigil on him after reading his fortune. The scene with her reading his palm also heavily hints at William's death and rebirth as Billy, and also another death that I will talk about later. Alice is the first officer at the scene of the car accident, and when we meet Jen is when Teen first said he was a big fan of her social media, but they reaffirmed that in the following scene, which begins with a time card indicating that we are back in the present year, but still not caught up to the events of the road. Teen is talking to his boyfriend, and he reads his mind that he's going to say, I love you, which causes Teen to confess that he isn't William Kaplan, or at least not completely him, though he doesn't elaborate on who he thinks he is. He then shows his boyfriend all the research he's been doing around the Westview anomaly, which for 3 years worth of research isn't a lot, but he has made contact with someone who is there, and the two of them go to meet him. It's Evan Peters, or as we know him from WandaVision, Ralph. He was brainwashed by Agatha to do her bidding. He doesn't tell them much, except to be afraid of Agatha and the names of Wanda's kids, which sets off alarm bells inside Teen's head. And he goes home with a lot to think about. Teen has been grappling with an identity crisis for the past 3 years. He doesn't just wonder what happened to him, he wonders if he even deserves to exist. Did he inherit this life, or did he steal it from someone who should have lived instead? Is he Billy Maximoff, William Kaplan, something else entirely? When he confesses to his boyfriend that he isn't really William, he can't even offer a name for who he is, because he doesn't know. That uncertainty eats at him and is compounded by survivor's guilt. He came back from the dead, but William didn't. Why him? He doesn't have the tools to process this trauma, and worse, he can't talk to anyone about it. If he admits what he truly is, will his life be taken away? He's trapped in silence, afraid that even acknowledging the truth will shatter the fragile reality he's built. It's a quiet, deeply isolating tragedy. And this episode gives us the clarity that he wasn't some naive teenager in search of adventure, but was as desperate for the road as everyone else. He wasn't simply following Agatha or chasing magic. He needed answers. He needed proof that he belonged. He begins to research Agatha, slowly finding his way to a site that mentions she is the only survivor of the Witch's Road, which even Alice, knowing who Agatha is and that she survived the road, it's not too surprising that some witch with a laptop made a website documenting some of the nastier witches out there. We also get a lot of hints here about the nature of the Witch's Road. The small details in Teen's bedroom as Lorna's song plays are everywhere, but I didn't see them my first watch through, and I'm kind of mad at myself. I blame the power of the song. Lorna's version is my favorite version of the ballad. We then get a quick montage of him breaking into Agatha's house in the interrogation scene, but this time from Teen's perspective. It's a very comical moment. The teen we saw parkouring from Agatha's roof and strategically knocking over trash cans is the furthest thing from the truth of him slipping and tumbling and limping away. I wonder if this might be a slight nod to the idea that people who seem really confident in what they do are actually mentally screaming and critiquing every one of their mistakes instead of recognizing the skills they are deftly performing. I don't think so. I think it's supposed to just be a comical moment of, oh, he is just a scrawny teen from the suburbs, not the strategic, agile anti-hero in the making that Agatha, and therefore the audience, first perceived him as. The montage ends with Teen saying his name, and Agatha seeing the sigil for the first time. And at first he says his name is William Kaplan. Remember, we couldn't hear it either. But when Agatha tells him to repeat himself, he says his name is Billy Maximoff. And then we are back in the present. Agatha is pulling herself out of the mud, and I wonder if her look is inspired by Cruella de Vil's look at the end of the 1996 live-action 101 Dalmatians. It's very similar, but as she's getting her bearings, she finds Teen who is moping about killing Jen and Lilia. I kind of wish she had more grief about doing this, but everyone processes in their own way, so I won't judge. The two of them talk. Agatha admits she suspected who he was since they met, but she wasn't completely sure until the end of the last episode. This tells us that Agatha was at least toying with the hope that Billy could have been her own son. We then get this really, in a weird way, touching moment where Agatha implores Teen to not feel guilty about acquiring his new body and doing whatever he's doing to survive. This is the emotional heart of this very plot heavy episode. Agatha's plea is just as much for Teen as it is for herself. She spent centuries justifying the things she's done to survive, convincing herself that the hunger for power wasn't her fault. In telling Teen not to feel guilty for taking what he needed to survive, she's not just offering him absolution, she's begging for her own. Remember, it has only been minutes since she killed Alice, since she was confronted with her mother and her son. This is possibly a peek at the inner monologue Agatha has every time she uses her power to kill another witch. This is what she does to keep going. This is what makes her special. This is what makes her a witch. This is also the moment where we see Agatha really try to step into the role of motherhood. She wants to comfort Teen. She has tears in her eyes as she is looking at him and can see him without the haze of the sigil for the first time. She looks proud of him. But Teen rejects her, telling her he will finish the road without her. And she switches back to the evil, calculating Agatha, the anger protecting her heart once more. She starts breaking down why Teen is really on the road, because he is being cocky, saying he doesn't trust her and won't tell her anything. The breakdown itself is a reminder to him she knows him better than he thinks she does. She ticks off her clues, slowly, deliberately, a panther circling her prey, and she remembers he has a twin brother. Ding, 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 she got her prize. He agrees to finish the road with her, for Tommy's sake. Before we move on to my favorite episode in the whole series, let's talk about how Alice, Jen, and Lilia represent some aspects of the triple goddess. Lilia is the easiest to narrow down. She is the crone. She is the oldest witch in the coven, and the archetype of the crone is the seer or guide, which goes hand in hand with her clairvoyance. The crone is also represented by the waning moon, the symbol of Lilia's trial. But this isn't a story about a harmonious coven who works within the ideals of the triple goddess. These women are broken and are struggling to reclaim the power they've lost. Lilia is as much an inversion of the crone as she represents it. The archetype of the crone is a guide, but Lilia has been powerless to stop the tragedy she's foretold. She's been too afraid of and running from her power to use it effectively. Jen represents the mother. Her trial is marked by the full moon, and her powers are associated with healing and nurturing, just like the mother. Jen's fashion sense, confidence, and the way she carries herself exude maturity. But then there's her character arc. Jen's story is deeply tied to the idea of losing control over her own body and choices, something that aligns with the fear surrounding the coming of age of a young woman in a world that seeks to control and harm her, which fits more into the story of the Maiden. Jen's fears in her past force her into hyper-independence, a common survival response to trauma. This explains why she is covenless, not just because her powers are bound, but because she has bound herself. She is too afraid to let anyone close, too used to relying on herself alone. Her lack of magic and her isolation are both symptoms of the same wound. This makes Jen an interesting fusion of mother and the maiden. Her confidence and nurturing abilities align with the mother, but her trauma is rooted in the fears traditionally associated with the maiden. Which leads us to Alice. Alice represents the maiden, but she is also the inversion of the mother. Alice's trial is represented by the waxing moon, the maiden's moon. The waxing moon symbolizes growth, potential, the early stages of life, which fits Alice, the youngest witch still learning about her powers. Alice's story is one of self-discovery, which is typically associated with the maiden. She starts in a place of denial. She wants nothing to do with magic. She doesn't want to acknowledge her family history. She's running from it. Her trial forces her to face it, embrace her identity, and step into her own power. And Alice's powers reveal her lost legacy. She was never meant to be the cursed daughter. She was meant to be the protector, the shield, the one who nurtures and defends, just like the mother. But the curse twisted the role into something cruel, turning protection into a cycle of pain instead of empowerment. And Alice has an overwhelming connection to motherhood. She is shaped entirely by her mother's presence and absence. Her entire trial is about breaking free from the generational curse passed down by her mother. There's a fascinating inversion of the mother's archetype happening with Lorna herself, because instead of being a figure of nurturing, Alice's mother is a source of pain, fear, and trauma. This is one of the aspects that make these characters so compelling. They don't cleanly fit into their archetypal roles, which could reflect the fact that they're all witches who have been robbed of their autonomy in different ways. Jen was bound, Alice was cursed, and Lilia was powerless to stop the tragedies she foresaw. None of them got to step into their archetypal roles the way they were meant to. So the inversion is the point. In that way, they mirror Agatha's own fractured representation of the triple goddess. Unlike them, she doesn't just embody one or two aspects, she embodies all three at once, but in similarly broken ways. She is the maiden in her wit, charm, and impulsive recklessness, but she lost her innocence long ago. She is the mother in her desperate attempt to reclaim a son, whether hers or another's, but her power feeds on destruction, not creation. She is the crone in her ancient knowledge and cunning, but instead of being a guiding force, she manipulates, exploits, and withholds information. Instead of a guide, she is a monster in the woods. The triple goddess is meant to symbolize harmony within the self, but neither Agatha nor the Coven can claim that balance. Their stories are about what happens when their roles are stolen, warped, or denied, what it takes to reclaim them, and whether that's even possible. And now, let's move into episode 7, Death's Hand in Mine. I was so happy when my prediction of this episode came true. I guessed exactly how this episode was going to play out. Maybe not the fine details, but the story beats. When I told my friend about what I thought would happen, I finished with, if they don't do it this way, they miss an opportunity for one of the most devastatingly beautiful episodes in the series. And I was completely right. This episode is so amazing. This is a Lilia-centric episode, and we finally get to see what she has been seeing every time she spazzed or made a weird comment in the series so far. And the recap at the beginning of this episode is a good reminder of how many times she's seen something we haven't yet. The episode begins with Lilia in a pink dress, falling through endless black. That's all we see before moving on to Agatha and Teen walking along the road. Things are still tense between the two as they continue to the next trial. Teen makes the comment about Wanda. She's not my mom. I have a mom. Teen understands the connection Agatha and him have, and this is his way of denying that connection. He says this after asking Agatha if Wanda is really dead, to which she gives a noncommittal answer. She says yes at first, but it feels like a knee jerk reaction, perhaps meant to wound Teen, or perhaps because she wishes it were true. But then she corrects herself with a hesitant maybe, and this time it sounds more honest. They quickly make it to a castle, and they are put into the most intricate costumes upon entering one of the high towers of the castle. Agatha as the Wicked Witch of the West, who she says was inspired by her, and it calls back to the very first episode in the fake opening credits as the caution tape look reminiscent of the Yellow Brick Road. Teen is dressed as Maleficent, full makeup and all. I want to point these things out to highlight how gay and campy this episode is. One of Agatha's first lines is also, if you want straight answers, ask a straight witch, which solidifies this episode in its gay themes. I like how they use the theme of hyperqueerness in this episode. It's a celebration of queer culture. The characters having fun with their fantastical, appropriative to actual witch culture costumes from classic and new movies. Teen makes a pun during his tarot reading, calling himself the queerant. The celebration is also to help balance the intense theme of conquering the past and making peace with the future, a theme that is heavily spelled out for us with the trial's centerpiece, a table made for a tarot reading, with swords falling from overhead if they don't do the right sequence. I love the way we experience Lilia's powers in this episode, as they inform us of their nature and how she is different from the typical seer. She doesn't look into the future. Her future looks back at her and visits. And when this happens, she experiences time completely out of order. The directors make this episode out of order as well, so we can experience this day as Lilia does. It's incredibly clever, and we really get the sense of how distressing these powers are for Lilia, as the visions start to rapidly take her from present to near future to near past to the distant past and back again. We can feel her disorientation. She cradles herself as she frantically whispers, "Stop it, stop it, stop it." It's heartbreaking. And we get to meet Lilia's mentor, the woman who appeared to Lilia as a corpse during the first trial's hallucinations. She is the idolized crone, a woman of vast wisdom, cunning, and understanding. She is Lilia's guide throughout the episode, and we learn that the day Lilia returns to is her first divination lesson, and is so compelling and devastating that she returns to this moment. We get to see her first lesson in divination alongside her last. It is fitting that we learn so much about Lilia's character from her mentor. She calls Lilia out on her fear, on her lack of understanding and foresight, which is ironic given her role in the Coven. Lilia says, "I've never been good at tea leaves." And her mentor responds with, "That is a fiction you have told yourself." Lilia says, "It's better to be a hermit, to be a fraud." And her mentor responds, "So much fear in you, even now." These interactions, alongside Lilia's conversation with Jen about ignoring her powers, tells us how long Lilia has been hindering her own abilities through suppression, which is a beautiful metaphor for suppressing bad memories to hide from the pain. Lilia talks about deflecting fear and sadness with anger with Agatha and Alice, and we learn in this moment that she was speaking from a place of experience. Lily has spent centuries running from her past, from her powers, from the truth of herself. She has told herself she is better off alone, that it's safer to be powerless than to see and fail to act. But in doing so, she has severed herself from the very thing she needed most: connection. In this, she is not so different from Agatha, who clings to anger to protect her heart, or Alice, who rejected her own past rather than confront what it meant. Each of them has tried, in their own way, to rewrite their destiny, and each of them has failed. In between these pockets of fragmented memories and visions, we see Lilia and Jen walking through an underground tunnel, mirroring the path of Teen and Agatha. It's more like a reversal than a mirroring, like a tarot card placed in reverse. Their conversation connects the two characters versus the growing distance between Agatha and Teen. Jen adopts the aspect of the mother and how she handles Lilia coming in and out of focus with grace, understanding, and sympathy. And Lilia confesses her life to Jen, the pain she's seen, the torment of her abilities, which only makes the ending of this episode even more devastating. We see Lilia and Jen join Agatha and Teen in the tarot trial. Lilia is sounding more sure as she moves forward toward the table. She wants to do the reading for Teen, and she wants to do it right. She explains the spread, the meaning of the positions, and she argues with Jen and Agatha, desperate to do the spread correctly. It fails. She is almost impaled, and she's sent on another trip through her visions. She comes to realize how much she loves the other witches, and when she gets back to her mentor, she isn't afraid to ask what she is missing. Exactly, her mentor said. What are you missing? Why did you come on this journey? The question of the ages. I didn't want to come, Lilia replied. Then why did you? To get my power back. A lie. Is it gone? Where did it go? This is not the true reason. Lilia tries again, begging for sympathy. I am a forgotten woman, but sympathy is the nature of the mother, not the crone. Then remember yourself. Lilia breaks. She starts confessing the reason why she doesn't look to her past anymore, why she chooses to not remember herself. She sees her past as a field of death. She sees her visions as a powerless trauma forced upon her. I saw it, I told you, and it didn't change anything. And she's afraid to know when she dies, but she's already seen it. And her mentor tries to explain the comfort that she finds in knowing that death comes for everyone. It is the thing that we all have in common. When will it come for me? A pause, her mentor just looking at her meaningfully, saying, You know you've seen it with your eyes. I was falling. And then the camera flips to the other side of Lilia's mentor. Nothing has changed visually, but this simple flip is enough to lend to the understanding that we are seeing a different Lilia. I will fall. The truth of Lilia's fears, seeing her own death. And now what will you do with your remaining time? The parting words of her mentor as Lilia takes control of her visions. She understands now that the querent must be herself. She must define her own story and take control of the ending to save her sisters. I am the traveler, a traveler through time, a witness. Her purpose is to see, and she is seeing clearly for the first time, not blinking at the loss she will revisit by looking back. I am the Queen of Cups, her mentor sitting proud before her. Now you see. What is missing? Three of Pentacles, community, collaboration, voices waiting to harmonize, her coven. She needed them, had always needed them, but fear kept her at a distance. Fear of watching them die, fear of seeing tragedies unfold and being powerless to stop them, like what happened with Alice. We now see the full picture. Her failed attempt to warn Alice before she sacrificed herself for Agatha. The Path Behind, the Knight of Wands. A card representing Alice herself, the final witch Lilia couldn't save, the fiery, impulsive knight lost to the road. The Path Ahead, the High Priestess. A card for Jen, the final witch Lilia will save. This card also helps solidify the idea of Jen taking on the aspect of the mother, as the High Priestess represents high femininity. It also connects Lilia to Jen's journey to regaining her power. As Lilia says, the High Priestess is full of spiritual energy, either unwilling or unable to use it. They are two sides of the same coin. Lilia unwilling to use her gifts, and Jen unable to. The best part about a rewatch is if you're looking closely, you can see how they set up these visions in the previous episodes instead of adding the cards' backgrounds with special effects later. It's really, really well done. Obstacles. The Three of Swords. This is Agatha's card, representing how Agatha's pain, her grief, her sorrow, or the things that hold back the coven. But this isn't strictly on Agatha. All the members of the coven face these emotions along the road. Sudden Windfall, the Tower in Reverse. A card for Teen. Though the spread requires the card to be upright or reverse, Teen falls into both descriptions. His appearance at Agatha's door causes sudden upheaval, destruction, disaster. But it also leads to everyone confronting their pain, their grief, and causing them to grow and transform. And finally, the destination. Death. A card for Rio, Lady Death herself. And then we see the clues that were there before us. Rio coming out of Sharon's grave, her desire for bodies, the Ouija board warning that death was there in the room with them. She is the ending of all roads, the Grim Reaper, the original Green Witch. And she even tells us that herself when she first appears on the road. But like how all of these cards related to another Coven member and Lilia, so does this card. The trial is completed. A door opens back to the road, but the seven have arrived. Lilia sends everyone ahead of her, giving them some final advice, finally claiming her role as a seer with both hands. She is at the height of her power. She is no longer cowering away from her destiny, but is racing towards it, ready to fucking swear up. She tells Jen one final confession. I loved being a witch. Before shutting the door between them, sealing herself and the seven in the trial. Despite the pain, despite the suffering, despite a lifetime of visions she could never change, she meets death not with regret, but with love. Love for herself, love for her coven, love for the life she spent so long fearing. She is not fearless. She is terrified. She is very afraid of the sacrifice she is going to make for her sisters, but she is ready to face it nonetheless. And her voice shakes as she gives the most badass final words. As she faces down the seven, she warns them about the dangers of staying in a trial after it's been solved, clarifying that it was her who passed it. Something terrible usually happens. Disaster, destruction, sudden upheaval, like the tower, upright. She flips the card and the tower they are in turns upside down, mirroring the flip from one side of Lilia's mentor to the other as she realizes she is going to fall. The seven plummet to their doom upon the swords first, Lilia holding on for a second longer, and then she lets go. I will fall. The circular storytelling has reached its end where the episode began, with Lilia falling. We are left with a final vision. Lilia meets her mentor, a young girl once more, and her mentor says, let's begin, like when we first meet the crone. This can mean many things depending on your interpretation. She is meeting her mentor in the afterlife, a somber but gentle idea. Or, as someone who experiences visions, maybe this is hinting at the idea that Lilia will relive her life over and over again, powerless to change anything. This is tragic, and I don't personally like this interpretation. However, there is another theory that is similar to the last one that's my own ideal choice. Lilia sends herself back to her first lesson with her mentor and relives her life over again, but this time with a new lease on life, leading to a life she denied herself her first time around. One full of love, community, and radical acceptance of things to come instead of denial and desire to control the future. And there's evidence for this being the case in the show itself. Lilia's relationship with time is different from others. She has been experiencing past, present, and future simultaneously her entire life. And we see how she takes control of this ability and steps from the past to the present when she finally realizes what she did wrong with her first tarot reading in the trial. We also don't see Lilia die like we see the Seven and Alice die. The scene of her falling ends before she hits the ground. Though that final argument is similar to the refrain of Wanda fans since her ambiguous ending in Multiverse of Madness, as the common rule for Marvel is, no body, not actually dead. I'm not going to rant about my hatred for the Seven in this episode. I've said enough about them and they're dead now. I could say they did nothing, again, but skulk around and lead to Lilia offing herself. But that would diminish Lilia's sacrifice, and I'm not about to do that. Instead, I recognize that their purpose throughout this whole series was eventually to die to Lilia's hands, to allow Patti LuPone's character to go out with a cold as ice monologue and a kick-ass moment of brilliant storytelling. Lilia's story is the most compelling story in the series. Her journey aligns so intricately between her coven and the purpose of the Witch's Road, is so masterfully written. The road is all about transformation, loss, and reckoning with what you're willing to sacrifice. And through Lilia's interactions on the road and her visions, we learn it isn't about reclaiming lost power, but about accepting fate and choosing how to move forward despite it. Before we move on to the next episode, I want to revisit the Triple Goddess framework in relation to Lilia. Earlier, I discussed how Jen and Alice embodied aspects of both Maiden and Mother, while Lilia was primarily the crone. But I want to amend that, because Lilia too is deeply tied to the Maiden. And like Jen and Alice, her connection is not primarily symbolic, but literal. In our visions with our mentor, we see her as a young girl, the youngest person in the entire series instead of Nicholas Scratch, but that's later. This is a significant choice. If we step back and look at the show's overarching themes, power, loss, survival, and transformation, there's an unspoken truth embedded in these recurring images. The age you experience life altering trauma is the age you remain, emotionally and mentally, until you confront the past. Lilia, despite her centuries of wisdom, still carries the fears and helplessness of a young girl who first glimpsed the future she couldn't change. Jen, despite her confidence and poise, still carries the wounds of a girl whose autonomy was stolen from her. Alice, despite her strength and defiance, is still the child who lost her mother too soon. And Agatha, who embodies all three aspects of the triple goddess in a fractured way, is still, at her core, a daughter cast aside by her own mother, condemned as evil before she ever had a chance to decide for herself. This is why all of them take on the aspect of the maiden in some form, because their journeys are all about reclaiming something that was lost. For Alice, it's her identity, untangled from her family's curse. For Jen, it's about trust. Trust in herself, trust in others, trust that she can be powerful while being powerless. For Lilia, it's agency, the ability to choose what to do with her visions instead of being a passive observer. And for Agatha, well, we know that her story is far from over. The maiden is often associated with potential, with a future not yet written. And for these women, that's exactly what the road is. It is the first time in their lives that they are writing their own fate, rather than running from what was written for them. And now let's look at episode 8, Follow Me and My Friend to Glory at the End. We are winding down the series now. One more episode after this one more trial to face, and 3 more witches walking hand in hand with death to the end of the road. What will happen? A lot. Just wait. We start the episode back in the 3rd trial. Alice is on the ground, no longer looking like a dehydrated corpse. But don't get your hopes up. The camera is upside down. This is a classic film technique to let the audience know that this isn't a normal place. It's somewhere other than the world we've known, which is weird to write given that the setting so far has been an ancient and legendary road of immense magical power. But anyways, Alice is indeed dead. Rio is there, and indicating it's time for Alice to move on to the afterlife. Alice is obviously distraught, looking at her body that still lays on the ground. That's it? This was supposed to be the beginning. Without the curse, I could finally do something with my life. Rio replies, You're a protection witch. You died protecting someone. Rio's voice is even, almost indifferent, like this was nothing more than an inevitable fact. There is no anger in Rio's words, no malice, just a final, blunt truth. This was always how your story was going to end. A closed loop. Alice didn't come to the road for power or knowledge. She came here for closure. And when she was able to break the curse, sing her mother's song, and move on unscathed, she got her closure. Alice spent her whole life believing she had no future, that she was doomed. And the moment she finally dared to believe in one, to imagine a life not dictated by her curse, it was taken from her. And Rio is reminding her that she did do something meaningful. She saved a life. Maybe a life not worth protecting in Alice's eyes, but still, she did do something worth doing before she died. A small comfort. We then switch to Agatha, and Rio confronts her about Teen, calling him an abomination of the natural order of things. This makes sense. Teen, or Billy, was never supposed to exist, having been created by Wanda's desires and magic. And William was supposed to die on the night of his bar mitzvah. According to Rio, he stole a second life. The two women discuss what Teen wants out of the road. His brother, Tommy, restored with his own second life. Rio won't allow it. She wants Teen's life, but having him killed outright would make him reincarnate, and Rio would lose him. She needs his soul to turn itself in, and Agatha promises to make that happen. In exchange, she wants Rio to leave her alone, and when she dies, Rio cannot come to collect her soul. Rio agrees and walks off. And I love that Aubrey Plaza just cuts the green screen and walks through the hole she makes. It's so funny, and it was a great practical effect. Agatha has been running from Rio for centuries, and now she was finally ready to make a deal that would ensure Rio never touched her soul. It wasn't about power anymore. It was about spite, about hatred that had outlived lifetimes. I'll talk about their bad blood in detail shortly, but for now, I will just say this was a nasty jab at Rio. She's basically telling her, I hate you so much. Even when I'm dead, I will hate you. I will never forgive you. Jen and Teen catch up to Agatha, and they stumble upon their shoes, having made a big circle around the road. Jen looks at the shoes and sees ghosts. Every step of their journey has been paid for in blood, and she has nothing left to give. Teen looks at the shoes and sees failure, a test he should have passed, a promise that was broken. Agatha looks at the shoes and sees an obstacle, something to be endured, to be conquered, to be tried again. But Teen has had enough. We took them off to honor the road, he says, voice shaking. Well, I say screw the road. And as he pulls his shoes back on, the screen goes dark. He wakes up in a body bag, laying on a slab in a sterile lab version of Agatha's basement. Agatha quickly joins him, a slab popping out of the wall like a mortuary cooler. She is also in a body bag. Finally, Jen pops out of the wall, but she is less graceful about how she gets out of her bag, screaming and flailing. The quick comedic moment of Teen stepping in to help Jen and Agatha telling him, hey, don't steal our struggle, is hilarious and ironically thematic given the next scene. They know this is the trial of the Green Witch, plant magic, the cycle of life to death to life once more. There are grow lights that act as a timer, but no soil, water, or plant seeds. It feels like a trap, a trial doomed to fail without a powerful Green Witch. But Jen is determined to get them through it. She thinks about failing to protect Lilia and Sharon, not even trying to protect Alice, and Agatha taunts, projecting her own insecurities about her lack of power. And Jen gives a bit more lore about what happened to her, specifically that the binding happened while she was in Boston, and this gets a reaction out of Agatha. She confesses it might have been her who bound Jen's powers. I am undecided on if Agatha is telling the truth about her ignorance to who she was binding. She seems genuine in her responses, but knowing Agatha, this could just be an attempt to save face in front of Teen. I want to believe in her, for a lack of better word, innocence in this transgression, especially as she lets Jen grab her, rip out a piece of her hair, and do the unbinding ritual. In the unbinding ritual, I am clearly not a person of color, but I've seen Nikki Marina and Tiffany Starchild talk about how cathartic it was to witness this scene. Jen grips Agatha tight, not letting her pull away. This time, she is the one in control. This time, she decides what happens next. Agatha sneers, but there's something else behind her eyes, something cunning. Jen takes a deep breath, and then she says, you hold no power over me. They don't add any CGI to the scene to show the magic with the visual cues. They let the raw emotion of her voice cut through a century of pain, a denial, a reclamation. You hold nothing. The magic cracks. You hold nothing. The binding breaks. She's a black woman quite literally taking her power back from the white person who denied her of everything. I can't imagine the feelings a person of color might experience watching the scene. I know my own emotions were running high as I rooted for Jen, nearly screaming and full-blown crying in joy as her powers rushed back into her and she vanished from the trial. Tina's worried. Where did she go? But Agatha understands what happened, and I believe it was her plan to get Jen off of the road this way. Maybe it was a selfless act. I doubt it, but it could have been. It was probably a nuanced mix of selflessness, very little selflessness, experimentation to see if getting what you want would get you off the road early, and a dash of hope Jen would hit her with her power and Agatha could steal it. The reason I believe in Agatha's benevolence in this final interaction with Jen, even mildly, is because of this next scene with Teen. When he denies letting her out early by hitting her with his power to juice her up, she says something to the effect of, well, worth a shot. Sit down. I'm going to help you find your brother. She explains that Tommy is out there. His soul is close by. He just needs a body, and talks Teen through the process of finding Tommy a body. It's a beautiful scene as Agatha is finally claiming the role as a mother, the selfless nurturer. She encourages Teen and denies his self-pity. Remember your last moments with your brother. I don't remember anything. Yes, you do. The ritual is about connection. Teen connecting to Tommy through memory, through breath, taking in Tommy's soul and breathing him out into another body. Teen witnesses the boy die, drowning in a pool before putting Tommy inside of him, and Teen cries out, am I killing this boy so my brother can live? And he vanishes from the road. Agatha stares at the empty space and says sadly, no, Billy, sometimes boys die. And a single tear rolls down her face. She opens her locket, takes out her son's hair, and feels it on her face, waiting for the timer to hit 0. Only a few lights are left on. She seems almost at peace. Teen may never forgive her, but she did something for him, got him and Jen off the road into safety. She did what her mom said she never would. She didn't do something evil. She did something good and kind. And thematically, as if granting her wish to survive even now, she finds the dandelion seed in her locket. Teen putting Tommy's soul into the other body created a shockwave that broke the flooring of the trial, revealing fertile soil underneath. Agatha plants the seed, using her tears as water, and prays. The last two lights flickering, and one of them goes out. The dandelion sprouts, flowers, and becomes a cotton puff in a matter of seconds. And the last light stops flickering, becomes brighter, and then all the lights slowly click on. She passed the final trial. Agatha emerges in her backyard, and Rio has been waiting for her. This is the most action packed sequence in the entire series, but even still, every blow is layered in meaning. Rio wants Agatha dead. She failed to deliver Teen. Whatever rule that kept Rio from killing Agatha outright earlier has been broken along with the deal they made. Agatha uses everything she learned from her fellow witches. Alice's protection circle, Lilia's final words to her, when she calls you a coward, hit the deck. The healing water Jen used on Teen. None of these things work against Rio, but they buy her enough time for Teen to appear. For hardcore Marvel fans, this is a huge moment as he is dressed like his comic book persona, Wiccan. But for me, it's the next moment that's so important. He says to Agatha, "Don't take it all." And he begins to power her up with his own magic. She transforms back into her old outfit. The wounds inflicted by Rio are gone, and she keeps taking power from Teen until he's on his knees begging her to stop with his eyes. It would be so easy for her to keep going. You can see the desire on her face. Just a little more, just a little longer. It was second nature, a reflex. But then she saw his eyes, wide, pleading, terrified, and for the first time in centuries, she stopped. Her hands shook as she forced herself to let go, to step back, to leave something for someone else. She had never done that before. She's finally done it. She finally denied her hunger for the sake of someone else. This is her biggest moment of redemption, the moment she chooses someone else over her addiction to power. But Rio isn't done with them. She sends Teen flying and begins attacking Agatha, sending her sprawling. Teen gets another hit in and runs to Agatha's side. She says, "You know this is pointless. We can't fight death. It should be me." Teen argues, and she says, "It should be me. You aren't bad." Again, we see the Agatha willing to let the timer run out in the final trial, the aspect of the mother, selflessly willing to protect her son. And we know that's how she feels about Teen by now. But Teen says, "Neither are you," cementing his feelings about Agatha as a second, or I guess third mother? And she reaches out and strokes his chin, maternal love pouring out of her as she replies, "You're the only one who thinks so." Rio returns and says, "So who's it gonna be?" And before Agatha can say anything, Teen says to take him. And Agatha stands up, brushes herself off, and agrees with Teen. "Yes, take him. There, my end of the bargain is done. The boy. Now put back my garden, and maybe plant a few azaleas while you're at it." I'm choosing to believe that many things can be true at the same time when it comes to this moment because it's left a bit ambiguous as to Agatha's true intentions as she walks away. Was she really going to leave Teen? Or was this a ploy to drop Rio's guard? I think she was wrestling with this decision until Teen reached out telepathically and asked her if this is what Nicholas would have wanted, and she turns back and steals a kiss from Death. This might be a stretch, but Agatha knew Rio was going to drag out her death as she agreed to go with Rio. Death by 1,000 cuts, as she promised. So my hope is that her plan was to always catch Rio by surprise, to grab a kiss that would kill her instantly to deny Rio her fun. Death at her own terms, a final plot for her own agency. I love that where her body falls, flowers and mushrooms and moss bloom to life in a time-lapse fashion. It drives home the idea that death is the Green Witch. Rio sends Teen on his way, but when he makes it into his room, he notices something. There are many items in his room that he's seen on the Witch's Road, and he remembers back to Agatha telling him the Witch's Road doesn't exist. He remembers Lilia saying he is the magician, full of potential, able to turn his goals into reality. Agatha tells him, "You really are a Maximoff. Otherwise, none of this would be nearly so dramatic. And you're just like your mother." And the final pieces click into place. Like his mother, he has reality warping abilities, powerful enough to create the witch's road of his dreams. And now we understand so much why Agatha got so mad after Teen says he would never kill someone for his own goals, because the circumstances of Alice's death are all because of Teen. Without him creating a space that sucked Agatha's mother's ghost into it for her to possess and try to kill Agatha, Alice never would have had to hit Agatha with her power. And for the first trial, the apparent dip in the CGI quality was because the background was a replica of an oil painting in his room. I don't know why they don't mention the colorful fairy lights in his room that are the same lights in the third trial, or the ballad record is the same as the one Agatha breaks in the second trial, but I guess they could really only show a few instances of similarities before the audience would be like, okay, we get it. This is the twist I did not predict. I fully believe the Witch's Road was real. After everything they went through, Sharon, Alice, Lilia, I thought there had to be a reason for it. But there wasn't. There was no grand test of worth, no divine plan, just a boy with too much power, too much grief, and no idea what he was creating. They weren't following fate, they were following Teen's ghosts. Alice was right. The road wasn't real. But where did the song and story come from? I did predict Agatha's death, however. I knew she would sacrifice herself for Teen if they didn't outright fight Rio to the death. This was less from a belief in Agatha's character based on what I know of her, but rather what I know from the classic anti-hero story beats. This isn't to say that Agatha's redemption wasn't earned, it is to say there is an ambiguity on where she lands on the good guy, bad guy spectrum at the end of the series that is never fully acknowledged one way or the other. And it's this ambiguity that makes Agatha's redemption all the more compelling. You are never told to immediately forgive her of her past sins, that she's admonished from them and free from falling victim to her same terrible behaviors and patterns. So when she does choose to do the good thing so many times in a row, you are surprised every single time. Her allowing Jen to manhandle her to get her licks in before unbinding herself. Her helping Teen escape the road by getting Tommy a new body. Her not drinking Teen dry of his power when he was helpless to stop her. Her turning around and stealing the kiss of death at the last second. Every instance is a welcome surprise, and you aren't sure she's even going to do it until it's happening. And you are genuinely happy, or at least I really was, when after Teen makes his revelation, we hear Agatha laughing. And now we move on to the final episode, where all of Agatha's secrets finally come to light. Episode 9, Maiden, Mother, Crone. The recap begins by reminding us of every instance where Nicholas was mentioned: his bedroom, Jen's gossip, the Ouija board, the echoing voice calling out to Agatha. We see her die after kissing death, reinforcing that her journey is over. And the episode truly opens with her body dissolving into plant life again, and Teen picking up her locket, an immediate callback to its significance throughout the series. Then we shift to the distant past. Agatha is running through the woods, very pregnant and screaming with labor pains. She makes her way to a river, and as she props herself up against a tree, Rio appears. She looks different. Her greens are brighter, her makeup is lighter, her presence is softer. But she is still Death, and Agatha knows why she's there. The labor pains are unbearable, unnatural. Something is wrong. Agatha begs her not to take him. She threatens, bargains, curses her, but Rio can't change the order of things. The best she can do is delay the inevitable. She vanishes, and Agatha's pains ease. Nicholas is born. We then see Agatha come upon a coven of witches in the woods, using her son's crying to convince them to let her into their protective circle. She then kills them all. Time skips 6 years, and we see a young boy, presumably Nicholas Scratch, and he steals something from a market stall run by witches and runs back to Agatha, the witch is hot on his heels. And Agatha kills them as well. We now understand the pattern. Nicholas is the bait, and Agatha uses him to draw out witches to survive. In the next scene, Nikki asks Agatha, "Why do you kill witches?" "To survive." "Can't we live with the witches and survive with them?" "No. They will try to kill us." "Why?" And Agatha deflects. "If you want to survive, get used to this feeling." This is the same lesson she told Teen. But now we understand it a little more. Agatha's hatred of witches isn't just hunger, it's fear. She was sentenced to death by her own mother, by her own coven. In her mind, witches will always betray her. So she strikes first. And the next bit is just so good. Nicky doesn't ask any further questions. He trusts his mother. And he begins to hum a very familiar tune. "Walk, walk, walk the road, walk the windy road." Agatha asks him, "You walk this road alone, do you?" And they sing together, "We walk the windy road." And Nikki sings, "Wherever it may bend." And Agatha finishes, "I'll see you at the end." The ballad wasn't a myth that Teen turned into reality. First, it was Nikki and Agatha's song, a way for them to pass the time as they went from coven to coven. But I don't want to talk about this revelation yet and what it means. I want to talk about the next scene. Nikki wants food and wonders if Agatha can use her powers to make it. She explains to him that that isn't her gift. She can cast illusions, lie, blast holes in the earth, hurt, and force her will onto others, manipulate. But she can't grow food for him, or heal him, or protect him from what's coming, or divine when Rio will return for him. She can't give him what he truly needs. And here, the subtext clicks into place. The power of Alice, Lilia, and Jen, even Rio, the witches Agatha hunted, represented what Agatha could never do for Nicholas. We get a montage of Nikki and Agatha wandering the woods, writing their song together. Follow me, my friends, to glory at the end. And we move to a tavern. Nikki is singing the song, the crowd clapping along to the beat, and we get that this is another of Agatha's plot to get fresh witches, especially as a woman with fiery hair comes up to him asking about the song. But Nicky doesn't look well. He coughs and then he flees the tavern, unwilling to help her hurt them. The next scene, he apologizes to Agatha, still coughing. Even watching this again for my analysis, my heart was racing during this build-up, especially as they sing their song together as they lay down for bed, and we watch Nicky close his eyes. You can feel that he will never truly open them again, even before we see Rio standing at the edge of the camp, beckoning to him. He stands up, kisses Agatha on the cheek goodbye, and he is gone. Agatha wakes up in the morning, and Nikki is dead. His last words to her are Maiden, Mother, Crone. Now, let's pull ourselves together and harken back to the first time we heard the ballad, when Agatha and the Coven first sing it. Remember how I said she gets angry during the song? It happens as they sing Maiden, Mother, Crone. And now we know why. It is a knife thrust right into her heart, her son's final words sung back to her again. This connects Alice, Lorna, and Agatha so thematically. As Lorna wrote her version of the ballad to protect her child, the original ballad was written by a mother who desperately wanted to protect her son. Lorna existed centuries after Nikki, and yet she still somehow understood the power behind the song was always linked to a mother's love. That parallel is powerful, and it really cements the emotional weight of the song as something beyond just a catchy tune. It's a legacy of grief, survival, and the lengths to which mothers will go to protect their children. But the revelations aren't done yet, my friends. Agatha buries Nikki, and as she weeps, sobbing over heartbroken alternate lyrics to their song, a woman appears. She asks Agatha if she knows the way to the Witch's Road, that she has heard of it, but this woman doesn't know it as a lullaby. Somehow, through whispers carried by the survivors or neighbors of the witch covens Agatha drained, the song had become a legend, a place that promises a prize to witches who brave its trials and survive. And I do not blame Agatha for instantly thinking about how she can best murder this witch. She said it best in the beginning. How dare she? How dare she come up on her, inquiring after a boon while Agatha's face is still wet with the tears she shed over her freshly dead son? I mean, she couldn't have known that he was freshly dead that morning, but the stone grave is literally a foot away with fresh flowers placed upon it. Come on, lady, read a forest. She deserves what happens next. I am not sorry. Agatha gathers the coven together. They sing the ballad, but nothing happens, because Teen hasn't made the road a reality yet. Agatha taunts the witches, goading them into attacking her, and as soon as they do, she drains them dry. This moment marks the birth of Agatha's newest method of devouring witches, one that she refines over the next 2 centuries. As we watch, time passes in a rapid montage. The ballad is sung over and over, its melody persistent through the ages like an urban legend, luring more victims into Agatha's trap. The passage of time is steadily tracked by the shifting fashion of each new coven, mirroring how the Witch's Road forces its travelers into different period-accurate outfits. This, in turn, is a brilliant callback to the costume changes imposed on Agatha and the entire town of Westview during WandaVision. Just as Wanda warped reality through the lens of different sitcom eras, Teen has unknowingly warped The Witch's Road into a sequence of classic movie genres. A romantic thriller, a 1960s musical, a campy horror, the high fantasy of the castle, the sci-fi sterility of the final trial. Each trial is stylized with matching outfits and aesthetics, making the road feel like a cinematic journey through film history. Agatha once told Teen that his magic bore Wanda's same tell, and I wonder if she meant this very thing. The instinct to structure reality as a narrative, shaped by genre and visual language, is a fascinating connection that lends itself to Wanda and Teen's desire for control. Find ourselves back to the end of episode 2, in Agatha's basement, before the road appears for the first time in Agatha's life. As we see the real reason for her confusion and shock, an expression I mistook for excitement in all the first time I watched the series, we move back to Teen's room when he realizes he's the one who made the road, and Agatha has manifested as a ghost. She confesses to Teen that the ballad has always been a meaningless con, a way for her to trick gullible witches. He does not react well. The reality of his involvement in everyone's deaths, that he caused it with his mind, is sinking in. He begins to panic, and Agatha tries to comfort him as he lists off names. Alice. I killed Alice. That wasn't on you. Lilia. That was her choice. Mrs. Davis. Who? Once she realizes who he's talking about, she does concede that that was mostly his fault. But she also brings up the fact that he actually saved a life. Jen escaped the road, and we see her claw her way out of the dirt, then fly off into the sunset using her reclaimed powers. Finally, at least one happy ending. Anyways, and Agatha reminds him and everyone watching that she was planning from the beginning to kill Jen and the others in her basement on day 1. So in reality, he did save Jen. Agatha keeps going and kind of ruins this very tender moment, telling him what she told him and Nikki earlier. If he is going to be a witch, he's got to get used to doing what it takes to survive. He disagrees. He disagrees so much he goes back to Agatha's house to do a banishing ritual, using her locket as a personal item like he did to free her from Wanda's curse. For me, the jump to banishing Agatha feels like an odd direction, but I can see why he would do this if looking at his motivations through the lens of guilt, shame, and a misguided attempt to absolve himself. He is feeling a lot. He is only 16 and has been through so much just in the past couple of days. This is his attempt to lash out, to gain control over himself, to prove he isn't a monster. But he was also devastated at Agatha's death and was excited to see her ghost. He feels the same way about Agatha as Agatha does him, after all. This adds a layer of internal struggle within his character development. His affection for Agatha warring with his desire to protect others from the risk she presents by still existing in the material world. But as Teen starts the ritual, Agatha starts swiping at the locket, begging Teen to stop, or at least give the locket back. Then she confesses she can't face Nikki in the afterlife, and she summons the ghost strength to touch the locket and smack it out of Teen's hand. This revelation humanizes Agatha, showcasing her vulnerability and remorse for her past action. It also serves as a pivotal moment for Teen, who empathizes with her pain, leading him to reconsider his decision to banish her. Teen, along with forgiving her, offers her comforting words to her confession, saying that he's sure Nikki would forgive her for everything. And Agatha admits that Teen reminds her of Nikki, especially when he sees the good in her that no one else, besides Rio, does. Teen kind of changes the subject, mentioning that Agatha could pick up and put on the locket. They go back and forth, agreeing to team up, commiserating in the fact that they have a tendency to kill their coven members. Teen closes up the witch's road, replacing the door with a grave marker for Alice, Sharon, and Lilia, emblazoned with a pentagram. The cycle of loss, power, and transformation continues, as we are promised to see the two of them again in another Marvel installment, with Agatha saying, "Let's go find Tommy." Despite my lingering questions about this particular scene, I can't deny how masterfully Agatha All Along tells its story. It's rare to see a show so willing to embrace contradiction, where power of loss, humor and heartbreak, cruelty and kindness all exist within the same breath. Agatha herself is a testament to that balance. She is selfish and selfless, monstrous and deeply human, a villain and a mother. And the fact that Billy, the boy who walked the road with her, chooses to see the good in her, to reach for her despite everything, speaks to one of the show's core messages. We are more than what we have done. We are more than the worst things we have survived. And maybe, just maybe, we can still choose to be something better. Agatha All Along is a story of transformation, of reckoning with the past and deciding what comes next. And even if Agatha's path remains uncertain, one thing is clear: her story is far from over. At its core, Agatha All Along is a story about survival, about what we sacrifice to keep going, about the masks we wear to protect ourselves, and about the desperate, clawing hope that even after everything, we can still be something more. This is a show that revels in contradiction. It gives us a villain who is also a victim, a hero who isn't always heroic, a legendary journey that turns out to be nothing more than a con, and yet still manages to change the lives of those who walk it. The Witch's Road may have never existed, but the transformation it forced upon those who traveled it was real. The suffering, the love, the loss, it all meant something. Agatha begins the story as a woman clinging to the past, chasing power not for its own sake, but to fill the void left by loss. She has spent centuries devouring witches, convincing herself it's the only way to survive, the only way to keep going. Through her time on the road, through Alice's sacrifice, Lilia's final stand, Jen's defiance, and Teen's unwavering belief in her, Agatha is forced to confront something she has avoided for centuries. Survival isn't the same as living, and power isn't the same as purpose. In the end, she chooses to do something she has never done before. She gives. She lets go. She stops running. And in doing so, she proves that she is more than the monster the world and her own mother told her she was destined to be. And that's the heart of Agatha all along. The past may shape us, but it does not have to define us. We all walk the road alone. But if we're lucky, we find people who are willing to walk with us. And maybe if we're willing to change, to fight, to take the risk of being known, we can rewrite our own stories. Because the road has never been about the destination. Thank you so much for watching this deep dive of Agatha All Along. What did you guys think? What messages were you left after witnessing this series for the first time? I love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe to see more content like this in the coming future. Until then, I'll finish this story later.